Greetings to everyone. I am Santhoshkumar velayutham. Today my presentation focuses on DNS catch poisoning attacks and the proposed mitigation approach discussed in the paper. Let's delve into the key points we'll be covering today. Table of contents. Initially, we will be doing comprehensive exploration of DNS, starting with a visual representation to illustrate its significance. Following that, we'll embark on a journey into the background of DNS, uncovering its myriad use cases and the pivotal role it plays in modern networking. We'll also delve into the existing defense mechanisms implemented to uphold DNS integrity while also addressing the pressing challenges faced by the protocol in today's dynamic cyber landscape. Additionally, we'll scrutinize the body of related research, shedding light on the valuable contributions made by the previous studies to mitigate DNS attacks. Moving forward, we'll dive into the intricate workflow of DNS catch poisoning attacks, meticulously examining the various types of port scans and ICMP messages utilized in these malicious exploits. As we transition to real-world scenarios, we will vividly illustrate how DNS attacks unfold and discuss practical implementations, accompanied by insightful results obtained across different kernel versions. Finally, we will engage in a thorough analysis of our findings, meticulously dissecting the implications and drawing actionable conclusions to fortify DNS security measures in the future. Introduction to DNS. What's DNS? As I understand it, DNS serves as a distributed database that maps domain names like www.example.com to corresponding IP address such as 192.0.2.1, essential for locating resources on the internet. This translation process is crucial for accessing various online resources. DNS operates in a hierarchical structure with different levels, including top-level domains, second-level domains, and subdomains. This hierarchy effectively organizes domain names. The key components of DNS include DNS server, which stores DNS records and responds to the queries from clients seeking to resolve domain names, and DNS resolvers, which are client-side components that query DNS servers to resolve domain names into IP addresses. When I enter a domain name in my web browser, the DNS resolution process initiates. My resolver sends a query to a DNS server, starting from the root DNS server and navigating down the hierarchy to locate the authoritative DNS server for the requested domain. Once found, the authoritative server provides the corresponding IP address, enabling me to establish a connection to the desired resource. The DNS cache. The DNS cache plays a crucial role in the resolution of domain names to IP addresses in the domain name system. DNS cache involves storing previously resolved DNS queries in a temporary storage area known as DNS cache. When a DNS resolver receives a query for a domain name, it first checks its cache to see if it has a recent record of the corresponding IP address. If the information is found in the cache, the resolver can quickly retrieve the IP address without having to query authoritative DNS server, which speeds up the resolution process. Background. DNS has been employed in email authentication, routing security, certificate issuance. Let's start with email authentication. DNS serves as the backbone for protocols like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Moving on to the routing security, DNS doesn't just resolve domain names. It also contributes to mechanisms like PGP, route origin validation, by storing cryptographic keys and certificate in DNS. Finally, the certificate issuance. DNS plays a pivotal role here too. CAA records stored in DNS empower domain owners to specify which certificate authorities are authorized to issue SSL or TLS certificates. Challenges faced by DNS. DNS catch poisoning, DNS spoofing, DNS security deployment. DNS catch poisoning. DNS catch poisoning attacks such as those leveraging side channels like SAR DNS can manipulate DNS cache data to redirect users to malicious websites. These attacks exploit vulnerabilities in the DNS protocol to insert false information into DNS caches, leading to potential security breaches. DNS security deployment. Deployment of DNS security extensions has been slow despite its ability to provide authentication and data integrity for DNS responses. Challenges in implementing DNS security include complexity, compatibility issues, and the need for widespread adoption across the DNS ecosystem. DNS catch poisoning attack. DNS cache poisoning is a type of cyber attack where the attackers manipulate the data stored in the DNS cache of a DNS resolver. By injecting false DNS record into the cache, these attackers can redirect legitimate traffic to malicious websites or servers, effectively leading users astray. So, how does this attack unfold? Attackers impersonate DNS name servers, sending a request to a DNS resolver and then forging the reply when the resolver queries a name server. This is possible due to the use of UDP by DNS server instead of TCP, coupled with lack of verifications for DNS information. Consequently, when a DNS resolver receives a forged response, it accepts and caches the data uncritically, unable to discern its legitimacy. Despite these vulnerabilities in the DNS caching process, executing DNS poisoning attack is no walk in the park. Attackers have only a few milliseconds to send the fake reply before the genuine response from the authoritative name server arrives. Moreover, attackers must possess or guess various critical factors, including which DNS queries are not cached by the targeted DNS resolver, the port being used by the resolver, the request ID number, and which authoritative name server the query will reach. Furthermore, attackers may resort to gain access to the DNS resolver through other means, such as operating, hacking, or physically accessing it, thereby facilitating the alteration of cached data. Impact on network security. Domain hijacking. Attackers can redirect users to phishing sites or malware infected servers by poisoning DNS caches, leading to potential data theft or system compromise. Denial of service. DNS cache poisoning can disrupt network services by redirecting legitimate traffic to non existent or malicious destinations, causing service outages. Man in the middle attacks. By controlling DNS resolution, attackers can intercept and modify communication between users and servers, enabling eavesdropping or data manipulation. Early attacks. DNS cache poisoning attacks have been a long-standing threat to security of the DNS infrastructure. Notable incidents include Kaminsky attack. Dan Kaminsky discovered a critical vulnerability in DNS that allowed attackers to poison DNS caches by guessing transaction IDs, leading to widespread concern and patching efforts. SAD DNS attack. A side channel based DNS cache poisoning attack called SAD DNS was developed, exploited vulnerabilities in DNS implementations to inject rogue DNS records. Evolution of defenses. Over the years, security measures like DNS security extensions have been introduced to mitigate the risk of cache poisoning by providing authentication and data integrity for DNS records. Despite advancements in security, DNS cache poisoning remains a persistent threat due to the complexity of DNS protocol and the potential impact of successful attacks on network integrity. Threat model and workflow. DNS hierarchy and attack targets. The DNS hierarchy consists of stub resolvers, DNS forwarders, and DNS resolvers, with resolvers being the primary target for cache poisoning attacks. In our threat model, we assume that the attackers operates off path, unable to directly modify or eavesdrop on traffic between the resolvers and the name server. This scenario necessitates the use of side channels for executing cache poisoning attacks. Now let's walk through the workflow of such an attack. The attack workflow involves several steps to successfully poison the DNS cache of a resolver. Step 1. The attacker begins by identifying the victim resolver, the domain to poison, and its corresponding name server. Step 2. To gain more time for the attack, the attacker may slow down the name servers, thereby delaying legitimate responses. Step 3. Queries are triggered on the resolver as a preparation phase for the attack. Step 4. Using innovative side channels, the attacker infers the informal port of the query, a crucial piece of information for the attack. Step 5. With all the preparation in place, the attacker injects rogue responses into the resolver, employing spoofed source IP address matching the name server along with the matching port numbers and transaction IDs, effectively poisoning the cache. Traditional methods. UDP based port scans. UDP based port scans are a traditional method utilized to determine the status of UDP ports. These scans involve sending probes to specific destination port numbers and analyzing the responses received. such as ICMP port unreachable messages, which indicate closed ports. One key aspect of UDP-based port scan is the explicit feedback mechanisms provided by the presence or absence of ICMP responses. This feedback allows attackers to infer the status of UDP ports based on the responses received, facilitating reconnaissance and vulnerability assessment. Furthermore, UDP probes are often employed to identify public-facing informal ports. By discovering these ports, attackers gain insights into the accessibility and potential vulnerability of UDP service running on the service. SAR DNS. The SAR DNS technique and related methods represent a variant of traditional UDP-based port scans, focusing on indirectly inferring the status of informal ports by leveraging ICMP responses and side channel vulnerabilities in DNS software. Despite its initial innovation, the vulnerabilities exploited by SAR DNS have likely been addressed and patched to prevent such attacks from being successful. There is a way to defeat source port randomization. An attacker wants to know whether the target has an open port, so it sends a spoofed UDP message from the authoritative server to that port. If the port is open, no ICMP reply is sent and the rate counter remains unchanged. If the port is inaccessible, then an ICMP reply is sent back and the rate is increased by 1. Although the attacker doesn't see the ICMP response, it has influenced the counter. The counter itself isn't known outside the server, but whether it has hit the rate limit or not can be measured by any outside observer by sending a UDP packet and waiting for a reply. If an ICP port unreachable reply comes back, the rate limit hasn't been reached. No reply means the rate limit has been met. This leaks one bit of information about the counter to the outside observer, which in the end is enough to reveal the supposedly secret information. Concretely, the attack works as follows. The attacker sends a bunch of probe messages to the target, but with the forged source address of the victim in the case where there are no ports open in the probe set. The target will send out the same amount of ICMP port unreachable responses back to the victim and trigger the rate limit on outgoing ICMP messages. The attacker can now send an additional verification message from its own address and observe whether an ICMP response comes back or not. If it does, then there was at least one port open in the set and the attacker can divide the set and try again. Or do a linear scan by inserting the suspected port number into a set of known closed ports. Using this approach, the attacker can narrow down to the open ports and try to guess the message ID until it's successful or gives up, similarly to the original Kaminsky attack. Proposed approach. The research paper introduces a novel method of conducting port scans using ICMP packets, which are typically error messages and do not elicit explicit responses, to informal port numbers selected for UDP sockets. Side channel discovery. The study uncovers previously known side channels in the Linux network stack that allow off-path attackers to leverage ICMP messages to infer informal port numbers, highlighting the subtle interactions among ICMP, UDP, and application layers for reconnaissance and potential exploitation. Interaction among layers. The successful exploitation of ICMP-based side channels in the context of DNS cache poisoning attacks hinges on the intricate interactions among ICMP, UDP, and application layers, emphasizing the need to understand the address vulnerabilities at the multiple network protocol levels. ICMP as a diagnostic tool. ICMP messages are traditionally used as diagnostic tools for network troubleshooting and error reporting, but the research demonstrates how these messages can be repurposed by the attackers to gather information about informal port numbers and potentially exploit vulnerabilities in DNS resolvers. Uncovering hidden channels. By uncovering hidden side channels in the Linux network stack that have been overlooked for over a decade, the research sheds light on the potential security implications of ICMP interactions and the need for enhanced awareness and mitigation strategies. Impact on DNS transactions. The research shows that ICMP messages can not only be used for port scanning but also to disrupt DNS transactions, indirectly aiding cache poisoning attacks by causing disruptions in the resolution process, potentially facilitating malicious activities. ICMP message types. ICMP messages indicating fragmentation needed are typically sent by the routers to inform the source that the packet size has been exceeded the maximum transmission unit MTU of the next hop. This message includes the desired MTU to allow the source to adjust packet sizes accordingly. Redirect. ICMP redirect messages are used by the routers to inform the source host of a better route for a specific destination. This message type helps in optimizing network paths and improving routing efficiency by redirecting traffic through more efficient routes. Destination unreachable or post unreachable. ICMP messages with the destination unreachable type are generated by the routers or host to indicate the destination is unreachable or that the specific service or port is not available. This message helps in diagnosing connectivity issues, identifying inaccessible destinations. DNS attack. There are three types of attack. They are frag needed based public port inference, redirect based public port inference, and frag needed based private port inference. Frag needed based public port inference. To understand for public facing ephemeral port scanning, this diagram is the best reference for an ICMP frag needed attack. The attacker simply sends an ICMP frag needed message with their own IP address. This message includes a UDP header with a guest source port and a destination port of 53. It's crucial to note that the source and destination IP addresses should be the resolver's IP and the name server's IP, respectively. It's important to emphasize that in the described scenario, that assumption is that an initial UDP packet has already been sent to the name server, prompting the name server to respond with an ICMP frag needed packet. However, in reality, this sequence of events hasn't occurred yet, and we need to fabricate a scenario where the resolver accepts the ICMP frag packet. Interestingly, some widely used DNS software like Unbound and DNS Mask generate public-facing ephemeral ports, also known as wildcard sockets. This means that the Linux and other operating systems are more permissive with these ports, accepting any destination IP address in an ICMP message, as long as inner source address matches the resolver's IP and inner source port matches the ephemeral port. This leniency allows attackers to trick the resolver into updating the maximum transmission units for any remote IPs, even those it hasn't communicated with before. In the attacker's probe packets, their own IP address is used to fill the destination IP of the embedded packet. This action effectively lowers the MTU for the attacker's IP if the guest ephemeral port is correct. To observe the cache change, the attacker sends a verification packet, like a ping, triggering a reply from the resolver. By observing if the response is fragmented due to the lowered MTU, the attacker can confirm the success of the attack. However, if ICMP redirect is used for probing, the victim resolver becomes unresponsive as traffic is redirected to an incorrect gateway IP, potentially leading to black hole situation. In essence of public facing ephemeral port scanning exploits the permissive of certain DNS software to manipulate the resolver's behavior and potentially disturb its normal operation. Redirect based public port inference. This topology explains how the attacker manipulates the gateway IP using ICMP redirect packets. As we know, only the gateway can send ICMP redirect packets, and receiving similar packets from other sources will be discarded. The operational mechanism is akin to the previous topology we discussed. Here, the attacker dispatches an ICMP redirect packet containing an embedded UDP packet. It's crucial to ensure that the spoofed packet reaches the victim, that the resolver only processes the tuple. To confirm whether the cache has been updated, we send a ping and inspect the reply. If the reply is forwarded to the spoofed gateway IP, the objective is achieved. Otherwise, if the attacker receives the ICMP reply, the mission fails. Frag needed based private port inference. In the realm of DNS software, such as Bind, the generation of private facing ephemeral ports is a common practice. This feature presents a challenge to previously established methods, rendering them ineffective. To adapt to this scenario, an adjustment is required. The inner destination IP address must be set to match the IP of the name server. This ensures that an alteration in the cache state remain contained within the confines of the name server, making them inaccessible to the potential attackers. Interestingly, an alternative method exists for indirectly monitoring these changes. This method capitalizes on the finite number of slots present in the global exception cache. Within the Linux ecosystem, the cache is organized as a hash table accompanied by linked list. Collision occur when multiple IP addresses hash into the same bucket as the name server's IP. By saturating the available slots in the linked list, attackers gain the ability to indirectly monitor alterations in the cache. First, the attacker plants 5 spoof IPs C1, C2, C3, C4, C5 in the hash table. Then the attacker sends another spoofed IP AU. If the fourth tuple gets matched, respective cache overrides C1. Then the attacker sends verification packet with 1300 MTU. And if the ICMP replaces also 1300 bytes, then the attacker gets to know that the resolver's cache has been updated. Then the goal is achieved. If the fourth tuple doesn't get matched, the entry is not updated. So when the verification packet is sent of size 1300 bytes, the ICMP reply packet gets fragmented since the MTU of C1 is 1200. With this, attacker gets to know that the cache entry is not updated and then the goal is not achieved. To uncover IP collisions, attackers may need to infer the secret employed by this hash function responsible for calculating the index into the cache buckets. Typically, the secret is 32-bit and persists until the system undergoes a reboot. Once deciphered, this secret can be harnessed to identify which IP address collide with a specific name server's IP. This approach empowers attackers to target a resolver and potentially manipulate arbitrary domain names following a single instance of deciphering the secret. Central to this method is the identification of a collision set that facilitates the testing of different secrets to produce the collision. Notably, this approach diverges from the requirement of collisions with a specific IP address. Instead, it leverages the high-end probability of observing a collision in any bucket, courtesy of the birthday paradox. Successful exploitation. To successfully exploit this method, certain conditions must be met. C1. Must check the port number in the embedded UDP packet of an ICMP error before processing it. C2. Must catch the MMTU or next hop information. C3. Must not ignore the ICMP fragment needed for ICMP redirect messages in the kernel. C4. Must not shut down or retransmit the query after receiving ICMP messages. Unbound, starting from version 1.5.2, followed a similar path as bind by implementing. However, like bind, unbound previously utilized public-facing ports, leaving it vulnerable in both IPv4 and IPv6 on kernel versions 3.15 and 4.14. This vulnerability persisted due to the storage of MTU or redirect information in the kernel, particularly within a timeout-based tree structure. Analysis extended to other operating systems revealed FreeBSD's immunity to these vulnerabilities due to issues with ICMP frag needed and redirect handling. FreeBSD forwards ICMP frag needed errors to the application layer without storing PMTU information, violating RFC 1191 guidelines. Surprisingly, FreeBSD accepts ICMP redirect packets without verifying the embedded 4 tuple, further compromising its security. Windows, on the other hand, employs a hash table to store path information, including MTU. However, we observe no eviction mechanism, leading to potential memory exhaustion. Although Windows remains susceptible to exploitation as a side channel, practical exploitation is challenging due to the very varied memory configurations. To successfully exploit OpenResolver, certain conditions must be met. T1. The rejection of the ICMP error when the embedded source port is incorrect. The existence of the next hop exception is catch. The acceptance of the ICMP error. The open port status after receiving the ICMP error. Overall, among the 156,737 backend resolver IPs, approximately 13.85 are vulnerable, while 37.72% of 1.84 million front-end resolver IPs are estimated to vulnerable due to shared backends. Specifically, 8.9% of vulnerable population are susceptible to public-facing port scans. Estimating vulnerability to private-facing port scans relies on kernel version data from Nmap, with an estimated 7,788 backend vulnerabilities. Interestingly, most vulnerable servers are not running bind but older version of Unbound. DNS mask, or other untested DNS software. Among public DNS servers, 6 out of 12 tested were found to be vulnerable, including OpenDNS and Quad 9. Evaluation. We tested the fragment needed attacks effectiveness in catch poisoning across various server configurations, network conditions, and background query traffic levels. The attack involved an attacker host MacBook, a victim resolver PC running bind or Ubuntu, and a name server AWS. 9 groups of experiments were conducted, starting with an ideal baseline attack and progressively introducing different configurations and network conditions. Realistic scenarios were also simulated, including background query traffic resembling product environments. To maintain stealthiness, packet rates were limited, and variations in packet loss, jitters, and delays were simulated. The impact of name server muting levels and batch size on attack performance was also evaluated. Results. On an average, our attacks can succeed within 1.3 to 15.6 minutes, with test considered fail if unsuccessful after an hour. In baseline and packet loss experiments, success was achieved in around 80 seconds, indicating minimal impact from moderate packet losses. However, in experiments with the delay and jitter, the attack has affected, potentially leading to false positives due to the packet reordering. Despite this, our attack could still succeed due to implemented time gaps to mitigate reordering issues. Name server muting levels significantly impacted our attack, although less so compared to SAT DNS. Under the same muting level, 50%, our attack was 10 times faster than SAT DNS, primarily due to faster scan speed and not requiring iterative probes. Increasing the number of attempts in the muting level experiment lead to 5-fold increase in the average success time compared to the baseline, with one failure likely due to link layer issues. Discussions on various aspects related to DNS catch poisoning attacks, side channels, and their implication. Attack surface analysis. The researchers conducted an analysis of the attack surface, uncovering strong side channels that have existed for over a decade in Linux kernels. These side channels affect a wide variety of DNS software running on top of Linux, including popular services like Bind, Unbound, and DNS Mask. Vulnerability assessment. The document highlights that about 38% of open resolvers and 14% are vulnerable to the identified side channels. This vulnerability extends to popular DNS services such as OpenDNS and Quad9, indicating a widespread impact on DNS infrastructure security. Experimental validation. Extensive experimental validation was conducted under realistic configuration and network conditions to demonstrate the reliability and speed of the attack. The experiment confirmed the effectiveness of the side channel based catch poisoning attacks against DNS servers in the hierarchy. Cross layer implications. The discussions touch upon the cross layer implications of DNS catch poisoning attacks, emphasizing the intersection of network security, operating system security, and cross layered protocols. By exploiting side channels, attackers can target vulnerabilities across different layers of the DNS infrastructure. Key findings. The document presents key findings related to the resurgence of DNS catch poisoning attacks with side channels, highlighting the need for robust security measures to mitigate these threats. The discussion shed light on the evolving nature of DNS security challenges and the importance of addressing vulnerability at multiple levels. In conclusion, this paper highlights the following sections. They discovered new ways that the Linux network system can be exploited. They found that attackers can use ICMP messages to scan for UDP port numbers in a different way than usual. This affects various DNS software like Bind, Unbound, and DNS Mask that runs on Linux. They also shown how these exploits can lead to serious attacks that manipulates DNS caches with real-world consequences. To stop these attacks, they suggest some strategies like changing socket settings and adding more randomness to the caches. They tested all of this in the real-world scenarios to see how it works in practice using the latest bind resolver and home routers. References. These are the references I have used for this presentation. Thanks to all for listening this presentation.